go ahead and get started. We've got 2 chapters this week to do, so we'll do 14 today, and then we'll do 15 on Wednesday. And next week we've got 1 chapter, and last week we got 1 chapter. And pretty much what's in the last chapter, we've already covered most of that stuff already anyway, where they're just putting it together and building a network. All right. 14 is looking at the transport layer. So we're up to that layer now. So we're on layer 4. We're finally off of the network layer after we add several chapters on that one. So on the transport layer, you're going to be looking at how is the stuff carried across on there. You're going to look primarily on this layer at 2 protocols. So we're going to have the TCP protocol and the UDP protocol. And the TCP one obviously got used into the name of the protocol suite, and we've already looked at IP previously. So the 2 primary ones that you're going to have on this layer, it's not the only protocols on this layer, but the 2 primary ones are going to be TCP and UDP. And we're going to look at port numbers on this layer also. And the port number is going to tell us which application either sent the information or the application that the information is being sent to. So this is where it tells us in terms of that. So you're going to have those on there. As far as how your data is handled, as far as what type of format it is in, we've talked about down there on layer 2, if you remember, we talked about frames. Actually on layer 1, we talked about the data was handled bit by bit. And then on layer 2, we talked about it being in frames. And the frame contained the data that we were sending, plus we added the MAC addresses onto it. Then when we got to layer 3, we had packets. And those we had basically taken what's in the frame and encapsulated it and added on there the IP addresses, and which were your logical addresses. And we also, and that we were dealing with it as a packet, so there was some additional information put on there too. But the biggest thing was that we added those logical IP addresses. Okay. Now on the transport layer, actually I just told y'all backwards on that, because we took packets down into frames. The frame included the packet and added the MAC addresses to it. But on the packet just had the data within it that was passed down from the transport layer, and then we added the logical addresses on it. And then the frames had the packet enclosed in it with adding the MAC addresses to it. So now we're on the transport layer, and there is where we actually start, as you're going down, start setting the data up to be sent across the network. So on this layer, we're going to have segments. And all the segment is where we have broken the data up into smaller pieces to fit the size that the network can handle. Because there's a maximum size that can go across a network. And so it's going to choose a size in terms of that. that's going to be in terms of that. And all we're doing on this layer is just breaking the data into the segments. And essentially, the only thing that really goes on there is that there's a sequence number put on it. And so we've just broken it apart into smaller pieces that are manageable size pieces to send across the network. Okay? Now, when it goes on down, further down, when it got down to layer 3, and it's making it into a packet, it's going to get it exactly to the size that it's got to fit on the network, and it may have to break that segment up again. Okay? But it shouldn't if it was done correctly, although as it travels across the network, travels between networks, I mean, it may hit a network segment that uses a smaller size on it than what you were sending, in which case it's got to break it into multiple packets to send further. But segment is going to be just where we've broken the data into usable parts onto the network. So you may have this really large chunk of data to send. For instance, you're transferring a file, okay, across. Well, if it's a good sized file, it's not going to go all in one piece. So we will segment the data. And on that segmenting, we will label them all on it. Now, the difference on TCP and UDP is TCP is going to make sure everything gets there, and it's going to go in order, okay? UDP is going to be a trustful one, that we're going to trust it all gets there. We're not going to know that it all gets there or not. So that's where the difference is going to fall on that. But with the segment, when it comes back through, it's going to put it back together on this layer, pass on up, and you'll have the actual data like it was originally sent at that point, okay? It's one big chunk. So this layer is going to be breaking that big chunk of data into usable size pieces, segments, going down or coming back up. It's going to take those segments and put them back together into one big chunk there. So you got to have sequence numbers on it so it knows how to put it all back together. It's depending on which protocol you're using, UDP or TCP, it may or may not arrive in order. With UDP, all the pieces may get there in a variety of order to it, and then it's got to put it all back together. In TCP, it will actually arrive in order. So they'll be sent in order, and they'll be confirmed that they actually did arrive in order. So that's going to be the big thing that's going to be occurring on this layer. Now, with TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, we're actually going to send the information out, and we're going to confirm every segment is actually received. Okay? With UDP, we're going to send it out, and we're not going to know whether the other end received it or not. We're going to trust it got it. So you can compare TCP and UDP sort of like I'm saying that UDP is similar to a radio or a TV station, and that TCP is more like a telephone call. And we're actually going to relate it more to that in just a minute as we look at exactly how it sends it. Because with a radio or a TV station, they sit there and broadcast, and they trust people are listening to them out there. But the TV and radio station really does not, the announcer sitting there or whatever it is, really does not know if somebody is actually receiving it or not. Okay? So yesterday morning I was putting my church service on Facebook. Well, I could tell that it was going out on Facebook because I could sign on to Facebook and look and see it was going out. But I really had I have really no idea of who all sits there and receives it. Y'all follow on that? Now, I know some people do, because some people put a note back and say about how they're enjoying it, or when something goes wrong, put a note in there going, why is it not? Or they send me a text message. Because there's a couple of people that words don't get up there, they'll text me and tell me the words aren't appearing on the screen. Well, sometimes I forget to click the button to put the words up there at that point, and sometimes there's some other issue with it. But I really don't, and then we're sending it out on the radio also, and I have no idea really, as we're broadcasting out to the radio, as we send it to the radio and the radio station broadcasts it, I really have no idea how many people are listening to it on the radio station. So just follow on that. I assume there's people listening, but we really don't know. With Facebook, theoretically, we can dig back in and find some statistics on it, but what I have found, really don't believe numbers I see on it, so I don't know. YouTube, it'll actually tell you how many people view a video out there. So like for another church, I put their service on there in the afternoon, that I put the recording out there on it. I can look today and see how many people have actually clicked in to view the service. Now, I don't know how many people actually watched the whole thing, but I do know how many people actually clicked into it. Does that make sense to everybody? So basically, that's like UDP, okay? Now, if you make a phone call, you call them, they answer, and then you tell them what you want to tell them, okay? And they confirm back to you in the telephone call that they understood what you were telling them. So you have confirmed that they actually did get the message from you. Does everybody follow that part? But otherwise, you don't. If you did it the other way, you don't know that they really did. But with a telephone call, we know the other person did get the message, because we'll sit there as we're telling them whatever it is that you'll confirm with them occasionally during the call that they're actually hearing you, and they will also confirm to you, because they'll give you back some comments as you're talking along about they agree with you, or that's okay, they'll do that, or they're not going to do that, or whatever. So that you've got that going on there. So with UDP, we're just sending it out there, and hopefully it all gets there. And if they don't get something, then it's the receiver's responsibility to request it again, okay? With TCP, they're going to confirm that they got it. And so it's really the sender's responsibility to make sure they get it all, okay? If they don't get a confirmation, if you don't get a confirmation on it, you got to send it again. Your assumption is it did not get it. So we're going to look through on some things on that. So the header on this segment is going to be a really relatively simple one. That pretty much it's just going to be the size of it and the segment number and a few other little pieces on it. But they talk here about with the TCP protocol that you've got the TCP and the UDP. And some things you send are going to use TCP and some are going to use UDP. And actually, there's some applications out there that could you use either TCP or UDP, okay? With TCP, HTTP and HTTPS are actually going to use TCP, although you think that HTTP didn't use TCP, but it really does. FTP is always a real one that they use quite often as the example of an application that uses TCP. Now, there is also a TFTP that actually uses UDP. And Cisco is about the only one I've run into that uses TFTP. Okay? It just sends a file and hopes it gets there. And you actually use it on your Cisco devices that if you're transferring from your PC to the switch or the router, a file, configuration file, for instance, you'll use TFTP to do that usually. For the simple reason, you're directly connected to the router or the switch at that point. And so you know if it got there or didn't get there, okay? Because you're the one using it. So you'll use TFTP. And what the T is on there is trivial. So trivial file transfer protocol. Now, FTP is one of those, and it actually comes up on the application layer. This is where FTP is actually used. The FTP is one of those unusual ones of acronyms for us that actually stands for multiple things. And the really bad part is you use them together, okay? So FTP is file transfer program, and FTP is file transfer protocol. So the protocol that the file transfer program uses is FTP. Y'all follow on that? So be aware that you've got a double meaning on FTP, and that you could see FTP being referenced as the program, or could see it being referenced as the protocol. However, I've not really ever seen any problem when I've been in testing or certifications needing to worry about which one was which, okay? That you could figure out and handle what it was doing right there. That there wasn't something you got into a trick question. So with TCP, we're going to send the stuff, it's going to acknowledge it, and we're going to keep sending until it all gets there. UDP has no acknowledgement on it. UDP is connectionless, and that's a key term to know on UDP, okay? Whereas TCP is connection oriented, because with TCP, we're going to establish a connection and then send the information. UDP, we don't establish a connection. We just throw it out there and assume where we were sending it was receiving it and gets it all. Does everybody follow that part? And that's back to where I was talking about TV, radio station. They just broadcast it out and they assume there's listeners out there listening to them. Okay, but they really don't know there's anybody out there that is being sent out. I remember back on the Braves broadcast back in the mid 80s when the Braves weren't doing very good, that they had one night on the broadcast that the announcers sat there and are going, we don't even know if there's anybody listening to us tonight. And it was really late at night, and the Braves were not doing well that year, as they, for a number of years in the 80s, that they didn't do well. They had a couple of years that they did good, like 82 and 83 or so, and then the rest of that whole decade, the Braves were not a very good team. And they put it together at the end there to put that streak on that they went for the 14 titles or whatever. Okay? But there they were broadcasting late at night, like at 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. The game had run late that night. And that they were doing the broadcast. And the announcers came on and were going, we don't know if we're even talking to anybody. And they went, the next couple of callers we get, and they gave a phone number to call. They said, we'll give tickets away for the game tomorrow afternoon. They got one caller. Now, 2 questions was on that one was, how many people were still up listening to the game that were interested in going to the game the next evening? That could have been a difference on it. And then question number 2 was, how many people were even listening to them at that point? But they actually did come on that night and went, we'll give tickets away to the next 10 callers or something that call into the station at this point, that we'll give them a ticket to the game. Second question was, how many people even wanted a ticket to the game? Because that was the other issue they had right there. There was not very good attendance at the games either. And how many people would wanted to even go with a free ticket to the game? Unfortunately, I wasn't listening that night, but actually when they did it, I'm not sure if I could have gone or not. Because I was in South Georgia and the drive that would have been to get there. But otherwise, I would have been tempted to take them up on the offer. So, UDP connectionless, TCP connection oriented. So, it's going to vary on those. So the TCP is reliable. We know it got there. That's another key term on it. There's the acknowledgement. And if it doesn't get there, if it doesn't know that the data was received by the receiver, the sender resends it, which we're going to look at step by step in just a minute. So UDP, there's really not going to be much involved with it. TCP is the one that's going to be involved. And then we're going to talk about port numbers after we talk about how it does. TCP establishes its use. Well, actually, just to jump over to that later on. In any event, so there's where TCP is going to go. I've mentioned the header. Big part on the header of TCP is it does have port numbers on it, the source port and the destination port. Remember I said the port number is going to tell us what the application is associated with it. And I'll talk about the port numbers in just a minute. And with TCP, it's got an acknowledgement number on there because if the receiver has to send back saying, I did get it, it's got to have an acknowledgement number there so that the sender does know what it was. And we're going to talk about a window size on there too. And then it's got that sequence number on there. And that's actually, that's not the sequence number I want. Yeah. So the sequence number allows us to put it all back together. Okay. And then the acknowledgement number tells us about it was received. So they mentioned then on UDP, its header is real simple. Whatever order the stuff comes in, that's the order it puts it back together in, which may or may not be correct on it. So sometimes things are a little picked up on it. So the header on UDP is actually a real simple header. All it's got on there is the source and destination port, just like TCP. It's got the length of the segment, and it's got a checksum on it, and that's all that's there. It doesn't need anything else involved in it. And it's got the actual data, see, because that's not in the header. So the data's sitting there, but in both of them, the data's sitting there on that segment of it, and it's got a segment number on it. On TCP, it's got the sequence number also, but that's not for, as far as putting segments together. Okay? So then they mention on UDP some applications that use it. I'll tell you this much, voice over IP is the one you're going to see most often mentioned in terms of UDP, because we're not, it doesn't have to be exact on that. We can, as long as it puts it together basically as it arrives. And if it loses a segment of a telephone conversation, that's just a piece out of there, and it doesn't hurt our conversation usually. There may be a You may notice a slight misspot on it, but it's not going to really be a missed word or whatever. You've got a piece missing on it, so it can just be sent across UDP. And our mind will process it all right anyway. And if by chance it's too much data got missed right there that it's confusing to us, what are you going to do? You as the one listening are going to tell them, repeat that? I didn't catch what you said there. Or yesterday where I was at church and I had the mask on and I was speaking to went, wait a minute, I can't understand you, Dwight. You need to speak about it. Y'all know how the mask muffles us. And where it muffled for me, definitely the beginning of the portion of a piece of plastic makes more sense on us. At least from what y'all indicate, y'all can hear me better. So that's going to be that. Now, port numbers. They throw that one in at this point, and then they talk about TCP and its whole process. So, but there's some stuff you definitely got to remember about the port number. The port number is going to tell us the application that it's associated with. Y'all follow on that? So that's how the receiving end is going to know this belongs to this application. Morning. Is by that port number. It also tells the receiving machine what application sent it. And if you think about it, that's important information because you need to know that that machine needs to know which program this information was sent to, and also needs to know what program sent it to it. Okay, and that way it can get it handled correctly and do correctly on it. So we're going to talk about port numbers in terms of those numbers are going to be assigned on that. And there's actually 65,000 port numbers out there. Okay? Now you're going to remember all 65,000 of them, right?
I don't have that many fingers.
Well, if you take your shoes off, you've got 10 more toes. Let's skip that part. Okay? Rory might prefer you not to take off your shoes.
Yeah.
The shoe game too.
Oh, no, you have to clean shoes.
But it is early in the morning, so your feet probably are still clean from getting the shower this morning before you came in. So you haven't had a chance to get them too snowy or sweaty at this point.
I ran that marathon this morning.
Okay? So, but there are 65,000 port numbers. Now, you don't have to remember, and nobody knows what the 65,000 are, because a large number of them actually are not assigned, okay? That they group into smaller numbers. So there's well-known ports, and there's going to be, you're going to need to know a few of these, but you're not going to need to know the whole set of well-known port numbers. And those are port numbers from 0 to 1023. Okay? Now, y'all learned the binary. So y'all can know where that 1023 came from. Remember, if we numbered our columns across, we got some 256s, and the 1024 would be 1012 would be next, not 1024. 1012 would be next. 56. I'm completely mixing them up. Sorry about this. 256, then the 512s, then the 1024 column is the next one. Well, if we're only using through one previous column, that means our number can only go up to 1023. So that's where they got 1023 from. Okay? So it's not just a number somebody drew out of the top of their head. They were using binary to number port numbers in, so that we're using off of that, okay? So well-known ports are 0 through 1023. Those ports are numbers that have been assigned over time to applications that are used by everyone. Okay? They're not all assigned, so there's port numbers still available in there, but it's the common applications. Now, there's only about 5 or 6 that I'm going to tell you you actually need to remember. The book lists a number of them for you. I'm going to tell you out of that list, you're really not going to need to worry about their whole list of them. And I'm going to go through them and tell you which ones you need to remember, okay? Registered ports goes from 1,024 to 49,151. Those are port numbers that companies, when they develop applications, can go, all right, we want to always use a certain port number, and we want that one to be reserved just for our application, and nobody else should be using it. And they go and pay a fee to do that, okay? And so there's some ports get reserved out there. The best example one that I will give you off of that is 3389. Anybody know what 3389 is? What application it goes with? That's remote desktop protocol, okay? So port numbers are going to your protocols. Y'all follow on that? The RDP, which Windows uses for you to be able to go in, log into another machine, so that if Nathaniel wanted to be able to log into my machine, he could use RDP and get into my machine. Does that make sense? And that is used quite commonly out there, okay? Now, I ought to have a password on my machine so that if Nathaniel does go to log into my machine, that he can't get in and do anything to my machine unless I give him permission to, which hopefully Nathaniel wouldn't do if he did get to it, right? So that 3389 just happens to be one that's you will see mentioned sometimes as a registered port. Now, you don't have to register your ports. So there are plenty of applications out there that do use numbers in there, but really didn't register it. The problem is you write an application and you use a port number in that range. I write an application and use that same port number. We're going to have a problem if our applications are both used on the same machines. However, if what you wrote it for is used at places where mine's not used, we have no problem. It's just if somebody goes and wants to use both of our applications, then there's a problem. So there is also a private or dynamic port, which is what we really should have used in my example, is that you and I should have used up there in the upper end, which is from 49,152 to 65,535. Now, I will tell you this on here. If you will just remember 1,000 and 49,000, you're okay, and the 65,000, okay? Everything I've ever tested on, that was good enough for it. Now, I'm not going to guarantee you on your test, they may not get more specific, but I doubt very seriously that they're going to ask you is registered ports go through 49,151 or 49,380 or 49,016. They're going to have 49,151 as one of your choices, and the other 3 choices are going to be off from that. Actually, I can tell you what most likely 2 of them are going to be. 1,023 is going to be one of them, and 65,535 is going to be one of the other answers, okay? And then the other answer is going to be something completely out in left field. Y'all follow on that? So I doubt very seriously you're going to run into a question. I haven't, and all the time I've taken networking tests, I do not remember ever hitting an issue where I needed to remember further than 1,000 and 49,000. That was close enough where I could get it. And as a matter of fact, sometimes They just give it in round numbers, okay? And so I didn't even have to worry that far on it. But it's just like I told you earlier in the books and things, the same way, okay? Well-known ports are ones that have been assigned out there belonging to generic applications, okay? Registered ports are ports that you're to register and you have to pay a fee to get them registered. And they get put on this list out there by the organization that manages it. And I guess IANA's the one that handles it actually. And they are assigned on there. And then those last ones, the private and or dynamic ports, are ones that anybody can use for whatever purpose. Now, truth be is like what I gave y'all as an example, that if you went and developed an application, if you knew port number wasn't being used by anybody in your organization or wherever was going to use this application, you could go ahead and use a port number anywhere on that list. You should be choosing one up there at the top in that private range, but you don't have to. Does everybody follow on that? Likewise, when we talked about NAT before, I mentioned pinholes on it, if you remember, and that where when something came through your NAT server, you could actually change what it was associated with. You could choose for something comes in to get it to the specific machine, change and use a different port number than what it was supposed to be, or have it when it's sent in that's using a different port number, and that you can look at that port number and know, wait a minute, that belongs to a specific address, and then send it to the right address. I have done that in a couple of cases out there where I was allowing, like I was saying, Nathaniel, RDP into my machine, where I was going to allow somebody to RDP into their machine from some other location to help make it more secure instead of using 3389 to come in on, because everybody knows 3389. And I can guarantee you the hackers are going to try hitting your stuff, if they haven't already, of hitting 3389 and seeing if they get in. Because somebody's just using the default port number on RDP. It's a real easy way for people to get in on it, because everybody knows 3389 is one used. RDP actually allows you to change the port number on it, okay? So that then you can set it as a different port number, and if they don't know that's port number is what's being used for RDP, it doesn't do any good. Although, we'll see in a second, there is a way to find out what the open ports are, but you wouldn't know what protocol is being used with it. And if you don't know that, you still can't get in. So you can, as long as it doesn't collide with something else that's being used within your organization, you can use off of the list however you want, okay? But preferably you leave the well-known ones alone, except for what they are specifically assigned to. The registered ones, you may well want to leave alone, or at least make sure y'all aren't using, okay? Now, the other part is on your firewall, you want to close everything that you're not using, because it's easy ways for people to get in, particularly off the well-known ones. So now, if we look at the well-known port numbers, and they give you a list here that starts from 20 and goes through 443. I'm going to tell you off of this list, there's some of these you don't need to know. Some of these you may actually already know, okay? Port 80 is what HTTP uses. So anytime you send a regular web page out there, it's using port 80. And a lot of people already know that, okay? Because if you've ever noticed, now port numbers are going to come on the back end of your addresses. So you put a URL out there, and if you want to tell it it's using a different port number than the port number it's supposed to use by default, you put a colon and the port number on the end of it. Now, in actuality, the computer and going across the network actually puts on their colon and the default number if there's not a number there. So sometimes when you're looking at web pages, you will actually see, like for instance, www.dwightwatt.com, that it's actually www.dwightwatt.com:80. Because if you go to get my web page, you're using port 80 to do it. Y'all follow on that? Except, as long as we're using the default one, we don't have to put the port number on there. Now, sometimes people will actually hide web pages by using a different port number for their web page. I took a course a number of years ago now that was for a certified online instructor. They had their training materials out there. They did not encrypt them. They didn't do anything unusual to them other than they used a different port number. So for you to get to their training material, you had to put a colon and some other number on the end of it. They told you what was. And as long as you had that number, you could get to it. They weren't real big worried about somebody that wanted to hack in and listen to their lectures being a problem. They didn't want them out there just totally public without you having to pay the fee. Y'all follow on that? So they weren't big hung up on it because you had to take the exam at the end of it to get certification. And you had to have the right username and everything else to get into that and take it. But if you wanted to get in and listen to the materials, which theoretically you actually paid $400 for it, because school actually paid that certification for me. But they paid $400, and that got me access to the materials for several weeks, and then allowed me to take the test. And so they weren't real big concerned on it, and they used that approach. I've done some other things along the way that used the same approach, that for you to be able to listen to the material they had, they just threw it on a different port number, and they're going, if somebody, a hacker wants to get in and figure it out and get in there to listen to it, it's not going to hurt anything, and it might actually benefit the person. Actually, one of them was security training thing. And they're going, if somebody figures out how to hack into our security training on it, then it probably wouldn't hurt them to be listening to it then. And sometimes it's free stuff, sometimes it was other stuff, but it was a way on. So the port number there is important. Now, file transfer protocol is going to be the unusual one in the ones that we're going to go over. All of the other ones we're going to see, there's just one port assigned to that protocol. FTP actually has 2 ports assigned to the protocol. That one I would tell you to remember because of that, and that I see it pop up a lot of times. Besides that, FTP is used a whole lot out there, okay? Because you're transferring files a lot of times. So it uses ports 20 and 21. Now, 20 is used to send the data across, 21 is used for its control sequencing, where it's making sure the data's all getting there and how it talks back and forth about how it's controlling, but the data itself is sent on port 20. Now, I wouldn't worry a whole lot about which port's used for data and which port's used for control. Just remember 20 and 21's FTP. Everybody follow on that? Because if you were to ask me, I have to stop and think. I do know which one is which, but I have to stop and think which one is it. If you were to ask me which one was which, just out there when we got downstairs and going out on the street. Okay? 22 is SSH, and that one actually fits with 23, which is Telnet. Okay? Telnet, you need to remember, because I see that one pop up on different things. So 23 is Telnet. Now, remember, Telnet is when you're sending stuff across between your machines, okay? Telnet sends it unencrypted, so you really shouldn't be using Telnet anymore. But Telnet's still the one they ask you about, oddly enough, okay? And it does get used some. SSH, Secure Shell, is what you should use instead of Telnet. SSH sends the data encrypted. follow that part? So if I want to send some data to Andrew, I really ought to send it SSH, particularly if I don't want Andrea to see what I sent to him, because she can hack into the line and listen to what's going across, right? If I use SSH, she can look at it all she wants, but it looks to her like that I'm just sending garbage to him. But if I do it by telnet, she sits there and reads exactly what I sent across. So everybody follow the difference between the two? So you really ought to use SSH, but be aware of that port number for telnet. That's the one that historically everybody always asked about, and they still do, even though it's not hardly used anymore. So no 23, okay? 22, I would encourage you to know that one too, but I haven't seen that one asked very often on anything. 25 is the port for simple mail transfer protocol. That is when you send an email, you're going to use SMTP, which we'll talk about in a chapter or two. Okay? That one you need to know. So port 25 is used to send email, so no 25. DNS uses port 53. That one's not as important to know. However, if you go to use AWS, Amazon Web Services, Amazon's cloud, their DNS stuff uses Route 53 as the name of the program that they have set up on AWS to do DNS stuff. And they call it Route 53. And remember with DNS, that's actually working with the routers to send for stuff across. So they make some sense there. So 53 is DNS. It's not critical to know that number, but I would put it as one you ought to know, okay? 67 and 68, actually, here's another protocol that uses two ports. But it's DHCP, and I've never seen anything that asked me to remember what DHCP used for its ports, okay? So I'll put that one lower down on them. 69 is trivial file transfer protocol, which I already told you what that is. That's FTP that's not using TCP. Okay, it's using UDP, and that you're just trusting it gets there. It uses port 69. I've not seen much, but I do see, if you take Security Plus, it likes throwing that one in you, okay? It's mentioned a little bit, but not much. But 69 is TFTP, and that I do have heard students and stuff say that they needed to know 69 was TFTP. 80 is HTTP, which we already mentioned. Know it. If you don't already know that HTTP uses port 80, learn. That one will absolutely appear for you. Likewise, 443, which is the bottom of the list because it's the biggest one on the list, is for secure HTTP or HTTPS. And remember, the word secure comes before, and when you spell it, when you say what the words are for what HTTP, or what secure HTTP is, but when you're looking at just the initials, the S comes afterwards. Okay, y'all follow on that? It uses port 443. Know that one. So they follow that part? So make sure you do know what 443 is. That one will pop up for you also. Then you've got 110 as post office protocol. I still see that one pop up, although we're not using post office protocol as much now. Post office protocol is for your email when you receive it and where it is actually downloaded to your machine. And we'll talk about that later, okay, in the next chapter or so. That's not used very much anymore, although it's still out there, okay? That's the way email was originally done. IMAP is what you're actually using to do your email today, as far as actually receiving and sending on it, although when you do send it, you're actually using SMTP. But you're using IMAP instead of POP3, where y'all can sit there and that we can sit here and check our email here at school, and then we can go home and check our email again, and everything's still on the list right there for us because we're actually working off the server. And IMAP does your email working off the server instead of downloading it onto your specific machine. Y'all follow on that? Now, if you go back to the early 2000s, I know that's before y'all's time, literally, when POP3 was really used. But POP3 was big through probably about 2001, 2002. And I suspect every one of you was born after POP3 sort of declined, okay? But it's still out there used some, and I definitely know the 110. The 143, for IMAP, I really don't see that one mentioned very often, but you will need to know what IMAP is when we get to those protocols, okay? And then SNMP is Simple Network Management Protocol, which uses port 161. Don't worry about that one. The protocol we will worry a little bit about, but the port number on it we won't worry about. The 3389 that I mentioned on RDP. Remember that one particularly in terms of it starts with 3300. I have seen that one pop up sometimes because it is well used, okay? And that gets popped up sometimes off of registered ports. But beyond that, on registered ports, you don't need to know numbers, okay? Does everybody follow on that? So no 20 and 21. I definitely know 23, 25, 53, 80, 110, and 443. So I took off about half the list for you right there. That's not as critical to know, but if you can know them, it would be good. But if you have a problem trying to remember these numbers, know the ones I just told you, okay? Netstat command will tell us all of the ports that we've got currently open on our machine that's being used currently. And so that can be a real useful network utility. It tells us all the connections we've got set up right now using TCP and what port they're using. So you can see what's open and being used. Now, it can be useful from a security viewpoint because if you suspect somebody is hacking into your machine, you're in Netstat and discover what are they sitting there on, that some port is being used, and you're going, we don't really use that. Well, wait a minute, and probably got somebody has figured out that's a port open on through your firewall, and they're coming into your machine. And you want to go into your firewall and close that port, and you will cut them off right on that at that point. Any questions on that? Y'all got port numbers? The other part on port numbers is there's also sockets. And the socket is the IP address combined with the port number. Okay? So if you've got an IP address followed by a port number, you've got a socket. Does everybody follow that part? And you will run into that term used along the way too. So know what a socket is. The socket is the IP address and the port number. Now, a lot of times you're actually, and again, that's just using a colon to separate the IP address and the port number. Just like if you did it with DNS, and then you put the port number with that DNS name, that you put a colon and then the port number. Okay, you follow on that? But that's not a socket if it's with the DNS name. It's when it gets converted to the IP address combined with the port number. Because that tells us specifically which machine and application go to on that machine. So you're getting very specific on that. All right, questions on port numbers? All right, now, what we want to talk about is how TCP communicates. And they're going to talk about it in terms of how do we initially set up our connection. UDP, you've not done a connection, because remember it's connectionless, so we don't have to worry about any of this with UDP. This is just TCP, because TCP is connection oriented. So we're going to see how do you establish your connection, and then what they're going to talk about is the three-way handshake, okay, which is used to send the information across. We're going to talk about windowing in the process. So to establish that connection, you're going to use the three-way handshake. And where do they do that? I don't know where they put it. So with TCP, when you go to establish a conversation using TCP, the first thing going to be sent is it's going to send from machine 1, it's going to send a sync signal to machine 2. This could be from server to PC, server to server, PC to PC, whatever you're doing that you're going to use TCP. Does everybody follow on that? It's going to send a sync signal to machine 2. I should have that exactly drawn out here for you somewhere. Determination, establishment. So section 14.5.2 is where they show it to, okay? So we're jumping in this whole part on TCP. So we send a sync signal. Machine 2 receives it. Now, as far as that step there, I said TCP is like doing a telephone call. At that point, you have called the other number. Y'all follow on that? No voice has occurred in there. You have just called that number. Does everybody follow? Now, machine 2, when it receives the call, it's going to pick it up. Okay? So at that point, machine 2 is going to send an acknowledgement. The phone quit ringing is what you heard on machine 1, effectively. Y'all follow on that? That it was answered. Y'all follow? Machine 2 is also going to send a sync signal. That's when, in a telephone call, that the person you're calling says hello. Have I followed on that part? So now machine 1 knows it was received, okay? And knows it's the person on the other end. But there's that machine there that you've made contact with it. Machine 1, and on this acknowledgement, when it sent this, it actually sent a number here. Now, a lot of times they'll use 100 as an example, but it was a random number it sends, okay? The acknowledgement goes back, it will send it, that's a 0, believe it or not. It will send back 101 because it will send back 1 larger than the sync number on the acknowledgement. That way the machine receiving it knows what did it belong to. Y'all follow on that? It also sends a sync number that it randomly chose. Oops, a lot of times it used 200 as an example right here, that it sent across. And machine 1 will then acknowledge back to machine 2, which is when they say hello. Okay, because if I call one of you, I don't say hello when I call you until you said hello, right? Does everybody follow on that? And then at that point, you know who it is you're talking to. Actually, on our cell phones today, you've had a pretty good idea in the first place because my name appeared out there on your phone telling you that it came from me, right? But, so there's going to come back an acknowledgement of 201 on it at that point. And at that point, we've established our conversation. Does everybody follow on that? It's a three-way handshake. Because there's that one, there's that, and there's that. And you gotta go through all three steps to get the conversation started. If it was a telephone call, we're now ready to start talking back and forth with each other. I'll follow on that. Now, to finish it, either end can start this. So we're going to show it as machine one's doing it, but it could be either of these machines could actually start the termination. One of them is going to send a FIN, which is going to have a number with it also, to the other machine. And if that machine wants to finish the conversation up, it's going to send back two pieces. It's going to acknowledge that it's got the FIN, and it's going to send an FIN also. And assuming both of those are received at that point, the conversation stopped, and that terminates it, which they show you on the next page, because then this one, so it sent two of them, and then this one's going to send one thing back where it sends an acknowledgement of it. So there's three steps there to terminate this. A lot quicker than this one up here, okay? Because both ends should say bye before we cut the telephone call off, right? Now, you and I are talking on the phone, and I'm ready to finish the conversation. I say bye, but you're not ready to finish this conversation. What do? You ignore the bye and keep on going, right? So this part didn't occur right here, so the conversation didn't end. I indicated I wanted to end it, but you would know I don't want to end this conversation right now. And then when you decide you're ready to finish it, you'll say bye and we'll try the whole process again. Does everybody follow on that? So either side can start this termination. Now, any questions on how you start and end? Those are relatively easy. This is the one that you definitely know this three-way handshake to establish the conversation, and know that is the three-way handshake. That's what it's called. Does everybody follow on that? You will see that on test. The three-way handshake comes up all the time. Okay? Now, the next item is, how do we send that data across? And we're going to use windowing to do it. So here's a term that you've got multiple meanings of on the computer. Is we're going to use it, Windows, to do it. But we're not talking Windows of Microsoft. We're sending it across in windows of information. Okay? You've got this whole set of data you want to send, made up of a whole bunch of segments. What happens with windowing is the two machines are going to initially, one machine is going to tell the other machine, here's the size of window I would like to use. And examples where they show you this in books, typically that's 3. In real actuality, it's much larger. Does everybody follow that? But a lot of times in their examples, they show you it in terms of just 3 of them, okay? So machine 1 says, I want to send this stuff to you using a window size of 3. What that says is that it's going to send the first 3 segments across to you. Machine 2 will agree on the window size. And it's what's the biggest amount they can send at a time period before machine 1's got a response back, and how quickly and how congested your network is depends on how the size of the windows are. Okay? So machine 1 is going to send those 3 segments once it's agreed on. Machine 2, so it's sent 1, 2, and 3. Machine 2 receives 1, 2, and 3. It will send back a number 4. Because what it said is, I got through 3, start with 4 sending to me. Does everybody follow that? So you send it the next number to start with. My thinking always has been, it looks like you would send the number of what you last got. That's not what you send. You tell the other machine, start with this number. Okay? So that comes back. Machine 1 then sends 4, 5, and 6. But instead of 4, 5, and 6 getting there this time, only 4 and 6 arrives. Under normal TCP sending on it, it will look at that and go, I got 4 and 6, but didn't get 5, so 6 is worthless to me. Because 5 is missing. Does everybody follow on that? So it will send back 5 as its number, because it needs it to start from 5 this time. It didn't get 5, and as far as machine 2 is concerned, it didn't get anything beyond 5. Does everybody follow that part? So machine 1 will send 5, 6, and 7 at that point. Does everybody follow how that works? If it doesn't all get there, it sends whatever it got continuing sequentially. It sent the next number after that. But if there's a number skipped, it's got to start from there. Y'all follow on that? And sends it again. It sends that across. And then it keeps on going and doing that. Now, if all of the data is getting there as it's sending it, the 2 machines in the midst of transmission can pause and go, wait a minute, you want to send a bigger window on this and offer a bigger window, and they'll send on the bigger window. Or if there's a lot of data getting lost, that machine 1 has to keep resending a lot of things, it will stop and say, let's renegotiate our window size again and go to a smaller window size. That the size it's sending is obviously too big, and it may be that 5 actually did get there in this case, but it took too long to get there. Y'all follow on that? Because of congestion, etc. So it will renegotiate. They will renegotiate at different periods of time through it. You don't have to worry about how long or anything. Just be aware it does renegotiate. What this means is, by the time we get through, machine 1 knows every segment got to machine 2. Y'all follow on that? Because we confirmed all the way through as it sent it piece by piece by piece. Everything was received. Now there is, and I don't remember if it's in your book or not, they actually have one now, and I think it's in the other course it mentions. There is another one that they now have out there, which is brand new, that you can actually send partial, and it can come back and say that which segments got missed and not to resend the other segments. But I have not seen that on a test yet, and I say that was mentioned in the 2601 class I'm teaching, which is using Cisco materials also. I'll have to look it up and see what is the name that they're calling that. They don't have it in this book, but there is a way to do it on partial. And I think it might be partial, maybe what it is, okay? But that does work on there. So you're going through, and big thing is you're trying to avoid the congestion and trying to get the stuff there as quickly as possible, but guaranteed it got there. Critical for you to know on that. UDP, really simple. You send it and just keep sending it and get it all sent. You send all the segments, you just send them out one right after another and trust it all receives. My example to you at the beginning of class, and so some of you wandered in during class that you may have missed on it, just want to review on it. Some of you are sitting here going, he's telling us the same thing again you already told us. Yeah, I know that. Is I compared it to UDP being like a TV or a radio station. They send out information. They really don't know who gets it, okay? They're trusting people are listening to them, but they don't know that really, okay? And definitely why they're doing it, okay? Telephone conversation is like TCP. You know the other person heard you, okay? Does everybody follow on that? So that you can relate the two tools. Port numbers, I went through those with you, and that is just going to tell us what protocol is it used with, which actually tells us what program it's associated with, okay? And that tells us what this actually belongs to or where it came from. Not just a machine, but the port number. Everything else we've looked at keeps telling us the machine is going to, the machine is coming from. The port number tells us what protocol to use or it's using and which application actually will tell us off of that. So it's actually telling us what application sent it, what application is supposed to use it when it gets there. Okay, y'all follow on that? And that's the only place you really bump into that in terms of what the port number does. That's critical information. Because, yeah, if we get it to the right machine, but that machine doesn't know what to do with it, it really didn't do us any good. Y'all follow on that? So you got to know what does it belong to. Perfect. That there is chapter 14, and we've just about used up the whole hour and a half on questions for now. So you do know three-way handshake, definitely. And that is the name for it. And you will see that on it. Know what windowing is. Because it is windowing because we're only looking at part of the data at any point. Just like the window here looking out into the front of the school. When we look out that window, we don't see everything out there, do we? But this big broad window, you see a big bit of stuff, but take your window in your house or whatever. You only see a small amount of stuff when you look out, okay? And when you move to the next window, you see some different stuff. Or if you're driving down the road and you look out the car window, you only see part as you're going, and then you see something else, and then you see something else. That's what windowing is. We first sent that, so we only saw that. We then sent that, so that was the window at that point. And then our window became that at that point down here in that example. It's how much of it we're actually seeing of it. So it's sort of like looking at the data, a whole big chunk of data, looking at it through a window only on parts of it that we can see, which is what you do with a real window. Okay? Which is actually where the name Windows for Windows operating system came from also. That's allowing you to see into parts of everything that's happening out there on the computer. You're not seeing everything at any point, you're just seeing parts of it. So that's why it's a window. You're being able to look at this part of this program, part of this program, part of this program. So they, wonders on that too, but know what the windowing is. Know what those basic port numbers are that I told you to know. Be aware of the difference between a registered, a well-known, and then the private ports. But I wouldn't have to sit there and get hung up on knowing exactly that well-known ports is 0 to 1023. Just know 1000. That should get you by fine on that, okay? Without knowing that exact number on it. Likewise, the 49,000 and then 65,000. Not to knowing it's exactly 65,535 ports. So do you follow on that part? And then UDP versus TCP. UDP is connectionless. It's not reliable. TCP is reliable and it's connection oriented. Are you going to follow? No doubt. So that there is really a summary of the whole lecture for today. Wednesday, we'll go through chapter 15. It should be application layer, and we'll actually, a couple of things I already talked about today, we'll come back to there, where we'll talk about specific protocols on different things, and so like the applications and protocols, and where I already mentioned to you like the email protocols that I told you some on today, that's actually talked about in chapter 15. Because we needed to know the port numbers today, but if you didn't know what SMTP or INAP or POP is, that's a little more confusing, but if I told you a little bit on it, that helps you remember on those. But Wednesday will actually talk through about specifically each one of those and a number of others, okay? And we'll actually be going through the same things. So they'll fit right back together between the two. The other one is we've already talked about a number of these to a certain degree. All right, if there's not any questions, we'll wrap it up for today. And I've got 5 minutes till 10. So I will see you Wednesday morning at 8:30. Any questions? Okay. Make sure if you've got work to get into me, get it in as soon as possible. Okay, because remember there's penalty growing on it. And if you miss a test, let me know which test, send me an email and tell me what test you need activated, and I will open it for you. Okay? We are down to the end. Because May 4th is when your final is due. And when we get to that last week, we're actually going to go back through the cabling, but before you can do the final cabling, you will have to have already graded off on having built them with the systems. Follow on that.
What week is that?
That'll be, actually, we'll be doing that 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
So last full week.
Gotcha.
And that last Monday.
Okay.
Okay, so it may be that last Wednesday and then that Monday, or we may get 2 or 3 days.
Okay.